Have you ever heard a child say something so strange that it chilled you to the bone? What if that child claimed their real mother was buried beneath your backyard? This is the haunting and unforgettable story of Noah Bennett, a boy adopted into a quiet American town, whose childhood whispers would later uncover a decades-old crime hidden beneath the earth. Stay with us as we unravel a journey through memory, silence, and the power of a child's truth to shake an entire community. In the quiet town of Maplewood, Vermont, where autumn leaves painted crimson streets and the church bells echoed gently across timber-framed homes, a single sentence on an ordinary September afternoon would change everything. Evelyn Carter, a warm-hearted woman in her 30s with soft eyes and a nurturing demeanor, was dusting the window ledge as the golden sunlight streamed through the lace curtains. Her adopted son Noah, just 4 years old, sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, quietly playing with a set of hand-carved wooden cars. His small fingers moved aimlessly and his brows furrowed in concentration, as if his mind was reaching for something long buried. Then, in a voice lower and calmer than usual, he said, "My real mom is down the well." Evelyn froze the cloth slipping from her hand. She turned slowly. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But Noah didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared out the window with a gaze far too deep for his age, his pupils fixed on the backyard beyond the garden. She was wearing a blue dress. "She fell," he added, as if narrating a memory that had just come back to him. In the dining room, Harold, Evelyn's husband, looked up from behind his black-rimmed glasses and chuckled, shaking his head. "Kids and their wild imaginations," he said, returning to his newspaper. But Evelyn didn't laugh. Her spine prickled with unease. It wasn't the words that chilled her, but how Noah said them, calm, unblinking, certain. She had never told him about the old well behind the house, the one they had sealed with cement and soil 3 years ago. When they redid the garden, Noah had never been near it, and yet he knew Evelyn stared at the boy, her breath caught in her chest. Since they adopted him from the Fairview County orphanage nearly a year ago, she had tried her best to make him feel loved, safe home. But something about the way he sat there so still, so knowing, felt foreign and deeply unsettling, not imaginary, not playful. Real. And for the first time, Evelyn began to fear that the past they thought they buried might not be gone at all. Something was still alive, still waiting, and it had chosen Noah to speak. The next morning, as the mist clung to the windows and the smell of cinnamon toast drifted through the house, Evelyn found Noah in the living room, again kneeling beside a sheet of paper crayon in hand. He had colored an entire figure in blue. The dress was rough, childlike in shape, but unmistakably central to the drawing. Evelyn crouched beside him, brushing a hand gently over his tousled hair. "Who's that, honey?" she asked, her voice light, but her heart tight. "My real mom," Noah said, without looking up. "She used to sing to me." Evelyn's throat tightened. Why is she all in blue? Noah paused, his hand hovering mid-stroke, because that's what she wore. When she fell into the well, Evelyn felt her blood run cold. "Noah," she whispered, Did you see it happen?" Slowly he nodded. "I cried, but no one came." That night, Evelyn sat on the porch with her neighbor Margaret Winslow, a retired librarian and Evelyn's closest confidant. "He's said it 3 times now," Evelyn murmured, hands trembling around her mug of tea. "Always the same, the well, the blue dress, the fall." Margaret pursed her lips. "Children sometimes hold on to stories they hear, in strange ways. Maybe he overheard someone about the well or this house, but no one's talked about the well." "Since we moved in," Evelyn said. "And he's never seen it. We sealed it, covered it with rose bushes." "Still," Margaret said quietly, "you should talk to someone. A child therapist maybe, just in case." Evelyn nodded, but something inside her already knew this wasn't just trauma or stories or nightmares. Something buried deeper was clawing its way out, and it had chosen her son's voice to rise through the dirt. That night, as Evelyn checked on Noah before bed, she found him wide awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering something she couldn't make out. She leaned closer. "Mom's still calling me," he murmured. "I hear her voice." In the cold, Evelyn's breath caught. The room, though, warm, suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. She touched his forehead. No fever, no fear, just quiet conviction. And somewhere outside in the moonlit yard, the rose bushes barely stirred, though the wind had gone still. The following day dawned gray and brittle. Evelyn tried to distract Noah with puzzles and a walk to the corner bookstore, but his gaze kept drifting toward the backyard. At lunch, he pushed his grilled cheese aside and whispered, "Mommy, I need to go out there." Evelyn stiffened. "Out where, sweetheart?" He pointed through the kitchen window. "Where the ground breathes." Her fork clattered onto her plate. "What do you mean?" Noah didn't answer right away. He pressed his small palm against the window glass. "Sometimes I hear her crying from under the flowers." Evelyn bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. That night, while Noah slept, she stepped into the backyard with a flashlight. The rose bushes were blooming wildly, untouched by the early frost. She crouched beside the old well spot, long since sealed with bricks and earth, and placed her hand to the ground. Cold and still. And then, faintly as if in a dream, a muffled sound like a distant moan carried through the soil. She shot upright, heart pounding. It must have been the wind, she told herself. Just the wind. But when she turned to go back inside, she saw Noah standing barefoot at the sliding door, watching her eyes wide. "She's lonely?" he whispered through the glass. "She wants to come back." The next morning, Evelyn went to the town library, leaving Noah with Margaret. She asked for property records, old news articles, anything about the house's history. A kind archivist, Mr. Keller, pulled a dusty file. "You're at 411 Pine Hollow, right?" he asked. Strange case. "A woman named Lydia Hart used to work there as a housemaid. Vanished in 2003, never found." Her employer. Thomas Graves was questioned but never charged. Evelyn froze. Graves was her husband's uncle. The house had come from his estate. Her hand trembled as she traced the faded ink of Lydia's name. When she returned home, Margaret was waiting on the porch. "He said something new," she murmured. "He said she wore silver earrings. One fell off when she screamed." Evelyn staggered back. In the archived photo of Lydia Hart clipped to the file, the woman wore a pair of silver drop earrings. One was missing. Evelyn gripped the porch railing. Whatever was buried beneath her garden, beneath her home, was no longer resting. And Noah wasn't just remembering, he was witnessing. That night, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was pulling her into a truth she wasn't ready to face. Every sound in the house, Noah's light, breathing the occasional creak of the old staircase, the whisper of wind tapping against the windows felt like echoes from a past buried just beneath the surface. At 3 a.m., she rose quietly and walked to Noah's room, only to find him lying wide awake, eyes glazed but alert, staring at the ceiling as if watching something invisible hover above him. When she sat beside him and gently asked, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he responded in a hushed, detached tone. "She's in the dark again? She says she's cold, and no one remembers her." Evelyn's heart tightened as she brushed his hair from his forehead, whispering, "Who is she, Noah?" And he replied, "The woman who sings to me, the one with the missing earring. She says she had a boy, but he's lost too." The next morning, shaken and unable to focus, Evelyn returned to the town's dusty library and requested access to closed adoption files. Mr. Keller, hesitant but moved by her urgency, opened a drawer that hadn't been touched in years, sifting through faded records until he found a fragile document detailing Lydia Hart's disappearance in 2003. Attached was a note scribbled in red ink. "One dependent child, male approx, 2 years old, taken into emergency custody. Identity redacted." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she read. The birth year matched Noah's, but the name and origin didn't. Could it be possible the files had been altered or, worse, falsified? That evening, Evelyn sat on the porch with Margaret nursing a cup of lukewarm tea while watching Noah play in the distance. "Do you think it's possible," she asked slowly, "for a child to remember something from before they could speak?" Margaret looked at her eyes full of quiet wisdom and said, "Children remember in feelings and fear, in dreams they don't have words for yet." As the sun dipped below the hills, Evelyn walked back into the house and found Noah at the kitchen table, hunched over a sketch pad, drawing with the intense focus of someone older than his years. When she looked down, her breath caught on the page, was a crude drawing of a deep well. A man holding a shovel, a woman in a blue dress with one earring missing, and a small boy crying beneath a tree. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice breaking, and without turning his head, Noah answered, "That's me, but I was smaller. Then she called me Eli." That night, Evelyn sat in bed, unable to sleep. The name Eli echoing in her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't place. The air felt heavier than usual, and even the gentle hum of the ceiling fan seemed to pulse with unease. Down the hallway she could hear Noah talking softly in his room, not playfully, but as if in conversation with someone. She crept to his doorway, heart thudding, and saw him kneeling beside the window, his hand pressed against the glass, whispering, "I'll find you. I promise I won't let the dirt keep you quiet." Evelyn stepped in. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Noah turned slowly, his eyes glazed yet sincere. "She's outside. She's trying to remember how to reach me." The next day, Evelyn reached out to a child psychologist at the University of Oregon named Dr. Marlene Shaw, known for her work in repressed trauma and pre-verbal memory. During their first session, Noah was silent for a long time, only blinking at the abstract paintings on the wall. But when Dr. Shaw gently asked, "What do you remember about where you came from?" he responded, "The hole, the cold." And the singing stopped. Evelyn clenched her hands together, tears burning the edges of her eyes. "Noah," Dr. Shaw asked, "did someone tell you about this hole?" He shook his head. "I was there. I saw the water. I saw her hair floating." Later that evening, while Evelyn and Dr. Shaw spoke privately, the psychologist leaned in and said carefully, "What your son is describing, it's not imagination. It's consistent with children who have witnessed traumatic events and suppressed them for survival." Evelyn's voice trembled, but he was just 2. "How could he know?" Dr. Shaw replied. "Sometimes the body remembers even when the words don't." The detail about the one missing earring, that's not something a child invents. That's memory. On the way home, Evelyn drove past the dense field behind their property, the same one that covered the sealed-off well. She slowed the car and stared at the overgrowth as if expecting something, or someone to rise from it. In the rearview mirror, Noah whispered, "She's under there, Mom." She told me her name. Evelyn's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "What name, Noah?" He met her eyes in the mirror. "Lydia. Her name is Lydia." Evelyn nearly stopped the car in the middle of the road. It was the same name from the orphanage file, the same woman whose disappearance had been glossed over like a smudge on a forgotten page. Her hands trembled. Somehow this child knew. That night, as a cold wind swept through the Oregon Valley, Evelyn sat alone at her kitchen table, the name Lydia scrawled across a yellowed page of adoption records she had requested years ago, but never dared to question until now. The file was thin, far too thin, and the name of the intermediary, James Rourke, had no legitimate agency address, just a P.O. box and a disconnected number. Evelyn opened her laptop and began digging deeper, cross-referencing old property maps, police records, and missing persons from over a decade ago. Then her breath caught Lydia Mallory. Age 31, had been reported missing in 2011. Last known address, 206 Ironwood Lane, Evelyn's current home. She slammed the laptop, shut heart racing. Upstairs. Noah was drawing again. She climbed the stairs with shaking hands and found him huddled over his sketchbook, crayon in hand. "What are you drawing, baby?" she asked. Noah looked up slowly. "I see her in my dream standing in the rain, holding something." Evelyn leaned in and saw the sketch, a woman with long black hair, drenched arms outstretched, holding a necklace with a small locket. The same necklace Evelyn had found years ago was buried near the old sycamore, assuming it was just a leftover from the previous tenants. Her voice caught in her throat. "Noah, do you know what's inside that locket?" He nodded. "A photo of me. When I was a baby, Evelyn's blood turned to ice." The next morning she called Gavin Brooks, a private investigator and longtime friend of her late husband. She didn't give him time for pleasantries. "I need you to come here. Now I think my son's mother is buried in the backyard." Silence on the line, then Gavin said calmly, "I'll bring my tools." 2 hours later, they stood at the edge of the overgrown field where the grass grew taller and the soil felt wrong beneath their feet. Noah stood beside them, quiet but focused, as if pulled by an invisible thread. There he pointed. "That's where she's waiting." Gavin knelt down, pushed away the thick brush, and found the old cement cap, cracked, moss-covered, and silent. "It's a well," he whispered. "Someone sealed it up." Evelyn covered her mouth, her eyes flooding. "God help us," she whispered. "Noah, how did you know?" He looked up at her, calm and unwavering. "She never left me, even when everyone else did. That evening as the orange twilight stretched over the Oregon hills, Gavin stayed behind with Evelyn, while Noah sat quietly in his room, staring out the window at the field, where the well lay buried beneath layers of time and silence. Inside, Gavin laid the cracked adoption file and the missing person report on the kitchen table, side by side, his brow furrowed. "This is no coincidence," he muttered. "Lydia Mallory goes missing from this address in 2011, and 1 year later, you adopt a boy with no clear record, no verified birth certificate, and a forged intermediary." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. "I never asked questions. I just wanted to be a mother. My husband said it was taken care of through a friend. I never even met the woman who gave him the child." Gavin nodded grimly. "Then we might be dealing with a homicide and possibly abduction." Outside, the wind picked up and Evelyn could see the tall grass swaying violently through the window, as if something underneath was trying to rise. Just then Noah entered the room, holding the old necklace she had once found and kept in a drawer. He handed it to Gavin. "She wore this," he said plainly, before she screamed. Gavin opened the locket and found a photo of a smiling woman holding a newborn. On the back, the words, "My sunshine always, LM," were written in faded ink. Gavin stared at the initials. "This is her Lydia Mallory." Evelyn covered her mouth in horror. Then, that child, Noah, was taken from her. Wasn't he? Gavin said nothing. His silence was the only answer she needed. Moments later, a knock echoed at the door. It was Deputy Carmen Hart from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, an old acquaintance of Gavin's, sharp-eyed and known for her discretion. "Gavin called me," she said, stepping in her boots, muddy from the yard. "If we're dealing with a sealed well and a possible body, this is now official." She paused, looking at Noah. "We'll need to ask questions, but not to scare the boy." Noah, who had not looked away from the field, suddenly said, "You don't have to ask me anything. I'll show you where she is." Everyone fell silent. Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Sweetheart, how do you know?" Noah turned to her, eyes too old for a child, and said, "Because when I cry, she cries too. I hear her every night, and she keeps asking the same thing. Why won't anyone look for me?" The next morning, under a gray overcast sky, a small team arrived at the edge of the property. Deputy Carmen Hart Gavin and a forensic technician named Elijah Moore. Noah stood silently near the tall grass, the wind tugging gently at his hoodie as he pointed to a patch of ground that looked no different than the rest. "It was there," he said, voice flat. "They filled it and planted over it. But she's still down there. She never left." Carmen exchanged a glance with Gavin, then gave Elijah a nod. He brought out ground-penetrating radar and began scanning the area. As the equipment beeped and lit up, Evelyn stood on the porch, hands trembling, watching everything unfold with a storm in her chest. Within 20 minutes, the radar identified a circular structure about 7 feet below the surface, perfectly symmetrical, roughly the width of a well. Carmen's jaw tightened. "We need to excavate." They marked the site and filed an emergency request for a dig permit. But Gavin made a call to a private excavator he trusted, knowing the process through official channels might take too long. As afternoon fell, a rumbling truck arrived carrying a compact backhoe. The operator, a gruff middle-aged man named Jesse, listened in silence as Carmen explained, "We suspect there's a concealed well, potentially with human remains. Proceed with caution." Jesse nodded, started the engine, and began tearing into the earth. As the first layer of sod was removed, Evelyn gasped softly. Just beneath the surface, old bricks began to emerge in a near-perfect circle. Jesse paused. "This ain't just a garden pit. Someone patched this sloppily." With more careful digging, the full mouth of the sealed well was uncovered, covered with a crude cement slab, weathered but intact. Elijah approached with gloves and tools, gently brushing off the remaining soil. Carmen crouched beside him. "Check for any signs of tampering." But before anyone could say another word, Noah stepped forward, his voice steady. "She's right under that." Carmen held him back gently, but Noah didn't resist. "I don't want to watch her come up," he whispered. "I just want you to hold her gently. She's been cold for a long time." Evelyn broke down in sobs. Gavin placed a firm hand on her shoulder as Jesse and Elijah began breaking through the cement slab. The first crack echoed like a thunderclap. The truth, after 11 long years, was about to be unearthed. As the cement slab shattered into jagged chunks, a rush of cold, stagnant air surged upward from the darkness. carrying with it a putrid scent of rot and damp earth that made even the most stoic onlookers turn their heads. Elijah, wearing a respirator and gloves, leaned over with a flashlight, carefully lowering a small inspection camera into the well. The live feed flickered onto his handheld monitor, casting eerie black and white shadows, until something came into view. A pale skeletal hand partially covered in tattered blue fabric, protruding from the dirt-lined base of the well. Carmen stood frozen, her eyes locked on the image as the entire crew fell silent. "Call the coroner," she instructed sharply before glancing at Gavin and Evelyn. "We've got human remains." Evelyn let out a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her knees buckling as Gavin caught her. "It's her," she whispered. "All these years." I felt her calling Noah, who had stepped away to the porch, sat alone with his eyes closed, silently mouthing something only he could hear. A few minutes later, the county forensic team arrived, carefully extracting the remains from the well using ropes and a pulley system. What emerged was both harrowing and heartbreakingly familiar. A deteriorated skeleton wrapped in remnants of a once blue dress, long strands of dark hair matted in mud, and a silver locket clutched in the decayed hand. Carmen picked up the locket gently with gloved hands, opened it, and inside was a faded photo of a baby with the word Benjamin scratched faintly on the back. She turned to Elijah. "Preserve this. Its evidence and its identity." By the time the remains were secured in the coroner's vehicle, a crowd had formed behind the police line. Neighbors, strangers, people who once whispered rumors about Noah, now murmuring something else. Awe, disbelief, and shame. Clara was no longer a myth or a ghost. She was real, and her child had brought her back. Carmen approached Noah, who hadn't moved. "We'll need to run a DNA test for confirmation, but it's almost certain." He looked up at her, tears brimming but not falling. "I already knew. Every night she stood at the edge of my dreams, reaching, calling. I didn't imagine her. I remembered her." Carmen nodded solemnly. "You remembered the truth, Noah. That's more than most ever dare to do." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills of Silver Creek, bathing the yard in a golden glow, Evelyn stood beside Noah near the now exposed well, a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in her hands. With trembling fingers, she tossed the flowers down into the hollow pit, watching them vanish into the dark where Clara had waited all these years. "We didn't forget you," she whispered. "We just didn't know how to listen." That night, the town of Silver Creek didn't sleep. News of the body found in the well behind Vincent Grant's old house spread like wildfire across local bulletins, radios, and even national TV stations that picked up the eerie headline, "Boy Claims Real Mother is in the Well." 20 years later, they dig up the truth. At the forensic lab under sterile white lights, the remains were carefully cleaned, cataloged, and prepared for testing. Melissa Carter, lead forensic pathologist, reviewed the x-rays and preliminary scans, noting signs of trauma to the skull, specifically a depressed fracture on the left parietal bone, indicative of blunt force. "This wasn't an accident," she said to her assistant. "This was murder." Meanwhile, at the county records office, Gavin had unearthed more damning evidence, Vincent's signature on forged adoption documents and records, tying Clara's real name, Noah Bennett, to the house as a live-in maid during the exact years she had gone missing. Noah sat across from Carmen Walker in the precinct's private office, silent as she unfolded the news. "We'll run your DNA alongside the remains. If it's a match, it confirms everything you've said." He nodded slowly, his voice soft. "I don't need a test to know she's my mother, but I want her name to be known. I want it on paper." At dawn, as dew clung to the earth like quiet sorrow, the DNA results came in. Carmen entered the observation room with the envelope in hand. Her name was Noah Bennett, and she was your mother, Noah. 99.998% certainty. Noah didn't cry. He simply bowed his head and whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long." In the interrogation room, Vincent sat under buzzing fluorescent lights, wrists cuffed to the table, eyes bloodshot. Carmen placed the locket in front of him. "Recognize this." He looked away. "I didn't kill her," he muttered. She threatened to tell everyone. "To ruin me," Carmen pressed. "So you pushed her." Vincent slammed his fist on the table. "I gave him a home. I raised him better than she ever could." "You buried his mother in a well," Carmen snapped, "and tried to bury the truth with her." Across town. Evelyn stood beside Noah in front of a simple granite headstone newly placed in the town's cemetery. It read, "Clara Bennett, beloved mother, never forgotten." Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the air smelled of turned soil and blossoms. Noah knelt down, placed his palm on the stone, and said, "They used to call me crazy, but you knew I was just a child," crying for his mother. Behind them, school children passed quietly. One girl asking her teacher, "Is that the boy from the news?" The teacher whispered, "That's the man who never stopped believing." Weeks passed, but the echoes of the discovery behind Vincent Grant's house continued to ripple through Silver Creek, and beyond national news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like, "Forgotten Son," "Uncovers 20-year-old murder buried beneath his feet," and "The Boy Who Remembered." Everywhere Noah went, people stared, but this time with a strange blend of reverence and guilt. Some whispered apologies, others simply nodded in silent respect. One afternoon, Noah received a formal letter from the Department of Justice inviting him to speak at a national symposium on wrongful adoptions and child witness memory. He hesitated at first exposing himself. Again wasn't easy, but Evelyn reminded him, "Your voice is the one they need." So he stood under bright lights weeks later in Washington, D.C., not as the haunted boy in the blue house, but as Noah Bennett, survivor, son, and truth teller. "They told me to forget," he said, his voice steady. "They told me I imagined it, but memory has a way of whispering even when the world screams over it. My mother didn't vanish. She was buried, and no child should have to claw through silence alone." The crowd stood in thunderous applause. After the event, survivors, social workers, and lawmakers came to shake his hand, many in tears. "You gave me hope." One woman whispered, "Meanwhile in Silver Creek, the site where the well once stood had been transformed. With town council approval and donations pouring in from across the country, a small memorial garden was built, a circle of white stones, chrysanthemums, and an engraved plaque reading, 'In memory of Clara Bennett and all voices buried too soon.'" That evening, Noah visited the garden alone. He sat on the bench beneath a blooming magnolia and read a letter he'd received from a stranger. It was from a young boy in Kansas. "I told my teacher, 'I still see my mom in dreams. They said it was nonsense, but I saw your story. Now I know maybe I'm not crazy. Thank you.'" Noah folded the letter slowly, eyes damp but heart still. Evelyn joined him, slipping her hand into his. "How does it feel?" she asked gently. "To finally be believed." He looked up at the sky streaked with the gold of sunset. "It feels like being alive for the first time." The following spring, the town of Silver Creek held its first annual Voices from the Well Memorial Ceremony, honoring victims of domestic silence and lost identities. Students, families, social workers, and survivors gathered around the garden where bugle flowers bloomed beside the white stone memorial. Noah stood at the podium in a light gray suit, no longer the boy tormented by visions, but a man who had rebuilt his truth from ruins. "We are not defined by what was hidden from us," he said, voice calm but unwavering. "We are defined by how we unearth it, speak it, and make sure no one else has to walk through the darkness alone." Nearby, Evelyn held up a photo of Clara Bennett for a group of students explaining how the garden had become a sanctuary, not just for Noah, but for everyone who once believed their voices didn't matter. Later that evening, Noah returned to his apartment, where a new letter waited in the mailbox. It was from the National Reconciliation Council. "Dear Mr. Noah Bennett, we are pleased to inform you that your work in advocacy and justice restoration has earned you the National Bearer of Truth Award. We wish to honor you in New York City this fall." Noah smiled faintly. The boy who once whispered to shadows had become a voice heard across the country. But it wasn't about the award. It was about what came next. With Evelyn's help, Noah had already opened the Clara Bennett Resource Center for Forgotten Children, offering legal help and therapy to orphans with unclear histories, and soon he would publish his book, Under the Well Memory, Silence and the Child Who Remembered. On the final page of the manuscript he wrote, "To Clara, my mother, in truth, if not in blood. And to my real mother, whose lullabies still live inside me, I found you and I brought you home." Outside his window, petals fell from the trees, soft as whispered names. Noah closed his eyes, knowing now, with certainty, nothing buried stays silent forever. Noah Bennett's story is a powerful reminder that no truth stays buried forever. In a world quick to silence the vulnerable, he chose to listen to, remember, and to rise. His courage brought justice not only for himself, but for countless others still trapped in forgotten nightmares. If this story moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more stories that matter, and never forget. Some whispers are echoes of truths the world needs to hear.